I really wasn't sure where to share this, but I need the validation that I'm not insane. You see, I'd never really had paranormal experiences, but I just cannot explain this. I'm in college, and myself and some other 7 people from my school went on a backpacking trip. We had 2 experienced leaders with us. We drove to Zaleski State Forest, which is in the Appalachian region of Ohio. It was early April this year, and it was cold, and everything was still dead from winter. After hiking miles into the forest, we set up camp at the backpacking campsites, and there were a couple of other groups of people as well. A few of them were friendly older couples, and then 2 college-aged girls. Everyone was pretty spread out from each other, and we set up camp farther away from everyone else. Now, I've always been able to sense energies of places, I guess you could say, and the energy in this area wasn't great. In fact, it was almost sort of spooky. Each of us had individual one-person tents, and we formed a kind of cluster in this side with my tent being in the back, so no one was behind me. Our cluster was also right next to the forest, because this backpacking site was like a big cleared-off square in the middle of the trees. So, fast forward. I'm dead asleep around 2 a.m. and I wake up to leaves crunching right behind my tent. Light footsteps walking in circles around my tent. They had a sort of heaviness to them that couldn't be a deer or a dog. Also, it didn't sound like just 2 legs. Whatever this was though, this creature was circling my tent for long periods of time. Slowly creeping up to the sides of my tent and then just stopping for some time, and then would move on to walking around the rest of the tent cluster. I could also hear a human-like breathing from the mouth when it was close to my tent. Like a light sort of heaving or something. I was shaking, too scared to unzip my tent and investigate. I kid you not too, that this occurred for hours, and it seemed like I was the only one awake, and out of nowhere I see an illuminated light shape from a tent. Although, I couldn't tell what it was from inside of my tent because it was all zipped up, but it was like a warm glow, I guess. I might have assumed that it was someone's flashlights, except nobody was moving. Yeah, I was paralyzed in fear. I simply couldn't believe that this was happening, and at some point, I must have fell asleep due to sheer exhaustion. But I could hear the footsteps circling until I did. I really don't remember much after that, but in the morning, I questioned my fellow campers about it, and my leader admitted that she heard the footsteps and noises as well, admitting that it was bizarre, and she would have investigated had she not been so groggy. One of the boys in the group said that he also noticed the light that came on but thought that it was someone else. Not a single person in this group got up to go to the bathroom or turned on a light that night, so I know for sure that it was nobody else from our group at least. I've heard things about the Appalachian regions being creepy and bizarre, and to be honest, now, I believe it. Have any of you guys had any similar experiences? And, if you have, what happened? I would love to hear about them down in the comments. Also, if you're not subscribed, please take the time to do so and smash the thumbs up button, as all of this is totally free and helps this channel out greatly.
About a year ago, I moved my family to a home way out in the woods in Tennessee. Now, I wanted to be brief here, but I need to get this off my chest, and after looking into this matter a little more, I have a lot more details that I think will paint a clear picture in the end, so bear with me. The nights here can be extremely loud, between the crickets, the tree frogs, and the cicadas. It can almost be deafening. One night, not too long after we moved in though, I had forgotten something in my car and headed outside to get it. The first thing that struck me as odd was that my dog wouldn't go outside with me. The dog always goes everywhere with me in the whole world pretty much, but for some reason, not this night. As I held the door open, she looked out and then looked up at me, like no, so I walked out, and I shut the door behind me. The second night that caught me off guard was that there was not a peep. It was like dead silent. I still shrugged it off and walked down my front steps and headed down to my car. When I had gotten about 10 feet from my car, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. For some reason, I felt as though something was watching me. I looked around, but nothing. After I reached in my car for what I had forgotten to grab earlier, I had this feeling like something was moving towards me. I took a step back and checked around me. All of a sudden, I heard one of the bushes next to me that lined the walkway to our front door sort of rattle a bit. At first, I thought it was just a rabbit that I had spooked, as I'd seen one just earlier in the day right where this was. A few seconds later, though, I heard the sound of a large rock, about the size of maybe a cantaloupe, ending a few feet away from me. It hit the walkway and bounced into a shrub. I instantly drew my gun and called out and said whoever that this was, they were about to be shot. After a few seconds of nothing, I began to think that maybe this was some local teenagers messing with the new people. I holstered my sidearm and turned and started walking back to my front door. Almost as soon as I turned towards my house, I heard this deep panting sound. It sounded like a huge dog, but what made me book it back to my front door was that it sounded like it was right behind me. I leaped up onto my porch, turned and drew my gun again, expecting something right there, but again there was nothing. So, a couple of weeks later, I was on my porch, night sitting on a bench with my wife. She'd got up and walked inside to get something, and as soon as she shut the door, I heard that panting sound again. I couldn't see anything, yet this sounded like it was right on top of me almost. The sound was coming from everywhere, and it was really loud again. I couldn't see anything, so I just headed back inside my house. At this point, I'll admit that I was questioning moving here, but after nothing else really happening, I just sort of let it go, I suppose. A month or so later, it was a really rainy and stormy night. This was around 9 p.m. and my wife and I enjoy listening to the rain and talking about how relaxing the rain is. Me growing up in Oregon, I love the rain, and for the past 10 years we've lived in Vegas, where it would dump the entire year of rain in like a day and then be bone dry for like the rest of the year. And for my wife, who grew up in Nevada, rain was such a rare thing that she loved going outside and watching it. So, for us, this is a pretty enjoyable experience, I guess you could say, except this night. Particular things took a really weird turn. So, as we were sitting there talking about the rain and relaxing, my wife stops me and said, "Did you hear that?" I replied, "No, what did you hear?" She says, "I swear it sounded like a small child calling for help out in the woods beside our house." I replied, "I definitely didn't hear that." After a few moments of us just listening intently, she said, "There it is again." I replied, "I didn't hear a thing, hon. Are you sure you're not just hearing things?" She looked at me sort of offended that I didn't hear anything and said, "No, I'm positive." "How could you not hear that?" "It was our son. I think he's out there and got lost." I replied, "No, he's in the house sleeping on the couch." We then both looked through the blinds that were open right behind us, and you could see all of our children laying there, and she said, "That was so weird. I swear it sounded like our son." I responded, "Well, it's definitely not him. I mean, he's right there. Besides, I really don't hear anything." She then stands up and says, "Wow, he's really crying out for help. I think I need to go and look for him." Now, at this point, if you knew my wife, you would know she is absolutely creeped out by the woods and wouldn't be caught dead walking into them during daylight, much less at night during a storm. I grabbed her hand and said, "I've been listening intently, and there's absolutely nobody calling out for help. You need to stay here." Okay, at this point, I'm getting worried about her. She was acting completely out of character, not to mention that at this time she's 8 months pregnant with our baby daughter. She then says, "What if there's some child out there lost in the woods though?" I replied, "Well, first off, I would be able to hear them too. Secondly, there are no other kids around here for miles, and the odds of them being lost 100 feet from our house that's lit up like a Christmas tree is like near to none." She then says, "I know, but what if it's a kid?" Before I could say anything else, she stands up and starts walking toward the stairs. I instantly jumped up and grabbed her hand again and said, "No, you're not going into the woods. I don't know what's going on, but you need to go inside." She then complies and we both go inside. I didn't know what this was, but it freaked me out a lot. Anyway, a few months after this, just as it was getting dark outside, I heard the front door to our house open and I got up to investigate. We have autistic 6-year-old twins, and we have the door set up so that they can't actually open it without us there. So, to hear the sound, it could have only been my wife. What was weird though about this was the fact that she usually doesn't go outside without saying something to me. I walked out the front and saw my wife walking down our private road towards the drive on the side of our house. I asked her what she's doing, and she says that she was sitting on the back patio and kept hearing a baby crying out in the woods. I replied, "Seriously? And you just decided to walk off into the woods to investigate?" She then looks out into the woods and says, "See, there it is again." I can't hear anything, but what I did notice is that it was completely silent out there again. I told her, just like before, the chances of a baby being out in the woods outside of our house is slim to none and that she needed to get back into the house. She said, "What if somebody left a baby out there though?" I replied, "Well, if that were true, then I'd hear it too." You know, at this point I was really starting to worry about my wife's mental health, obviously. I actually asked her to see a psychiatrist and she did. Now, looking back, I feel really bad about this knowing what I know now. A key to this moment though, was that my wife had just given birth to a baby girl maybe a month before. A few days after this though, we were out on the front porch. It's early evening and I just mowed the lawn this day, and our 3-year-old son was riding around in his little car in front of the house. He knows that he's not allowed outside of a certain area that we mapped off. He loves playing outside, but with the main road 50 feet in front of our front porch, we have to be careful, as a lot of boaters will fly through after drinking while on their boats. As we're talking, we're both sort of keeping an eye on him. A neighbor drives by and stops to say hi for a second. This interaction must have taken like 8 seconds, as all they said was, "How are things?" We said, "Good," and he told us that he would stop by later, as his wife got something for the kids who happens to be one of their teachers in their school, and we replied, "Oh, okay," and he drove off. I looked over to where our son was, and he was gone. I called out his name and ran over to the side of the house and could hear his car on the other side of the drive. I scolded him for leaving the area, and he said something in his 3-year-old gibberish and pointed to the woods behind our house. I stated that he had 5 seconds to get back to the front of the house or else, and he adamantly pointed back in the direction of the woods and kept trying to tell me something. I looked off in the direction of the woods and just assumed that he'd seen a deer or a squirrel or something, and maybe that he wanted to see it up close or something. I walked back up to the front of the house and he cried the whole way there. He got really upset at the fact that I wouldn't let him go into the woods, but I just wrote this off as him being curious, as most 3-year-old boys are, right? Now this instance isn't isolated, as our twins have done similar things, but nothing quite as extreme as this. I guess that there have also been nights though, where we had just laid down for the night and had heard a loud bang on the side of our house on the wall behind our bed. It was so loud that I jumped up and looked out the window. Our floodlight came on too, but I couldn't see anything. Now, the weird part about this is that our bedroom sits about 12 feet from the ground level, and we have a full-size basement that's cinder block. I put in my slippers and grabbed one of my 12-gauge shotguns and walked outside to investigate, and it was completely dead silent again. The floodlight that's on the side of the house had clicked off at this point, so I walked over to the end of the deck and shined my light around the yard. There was nothing. I walked around the house and shined the light around intently. As I approached the backside of my house, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Again, it felt like someone was watching me again. I shot the light up into the trees, but again, nothing. I ran to the corner, and the first thing that I noticed was that my 3 dogs were in that area, and they weren't making a peep. Our dogs have no filter and will bark at anyone and everything, this includes me. So, to see them all hiding with their tails between their legs, not making a peep, really had me worried. As I kept walking, all of a sudden, the crickets and the frogs started making sounds again. It was as if someone had clicked a switch almost. Like it was completely silent, and then all of a sudden, it was just alive again. I walked back into the house, and I told my wife that I hadn't seen anything. She shrugged and said okay, as long as our dogs were all right. Due to the circumstances that night, I decided to let the dogs in and sleep with us. This very same banging has happened in all 4 exterior walls of our house too. It's random and annoying, but just like this instance, every time there is nothing going on outside. There have also been times where we were sitting in the house and as I was watching a movie, my wife walked over to me and said, "Did you call me?" I replied, "No," and she said that she swears that she heard me call her name in her ear. She said that it was definitely my voice, and she didn't understand because it sounded so close, and I was a good 20 feet away from her and in my recliner. The important part to this too was that she was sitting at the table doing something and the slider to the backyard was open behind her. Now, our back patio sits about 20 feet off the ground and is like a sort of balcony. It has no stair access outside. I think the previous owner must have built it for barbecuing or something, but there have been several instances though, where she would say that she heard someone whisper in her ear, but she couldn't make out the sound. Again, I kept thinking that she was just going crazy, but as you'll see, I think all of this is tied into this final moment where things are revealed. So, the last thing that I want to mention before we get into what just happened is that I have a shooting range built behind my workshop on the opposite side of our property, next to the main road. It's kind of on a downslope, but it works perfectly for what I need for it. The range itself is cut straight into the woods going down about 100 yards or so. When you're at the downrange, you have woods surrounding you on all sides except back up to my shop. I have to say that it's always felt creepy when I'm dealing with my targets or mowing there. When you're down there, it feels like you're miles from anyone pretty much. One day, around 5 in the evening, I was sighting in a new rifle scope. The sun was still up but was going to start to fade soon. So, I knew this was going to be my final test, but until this point nothing really happened. While I was making my multiple trips down the range, other than this feeling of uneasiness I guess, but as I got down the range, I kept getting this feeling like someone or something was watching me again. I looked around but didn't see anything there. As I was placing stickers over my previous shots, I heard something break off to the side of me. It sounded like a large branch that snapped off a tree or something. If you've been in Tennessee woods, then you'll know that a lot of branches fall off trees randomly out of pretty much nowhere. So, this was nothing new, except this time it was really loud and sounded like fresh strong wood, if that makes any sense. I turned and looked but again couldn't see anything. I started walking back up to my rifle and I swear that I heard something right behind me. I turned around, but again I saw nothing. As I started to walk again, I heard this deep growl. It was really deep and loud, and what's worse is that it was all around me. I turned around facing the range and started walking backwards to the thought of some rabid dog charging out of the bushes had freaked me out. So, running wasn't a good idea. I slowly walked backwards up the hill to my rifle. Again, nothing happened. I grabbed my rifle and sprayed the target with rapid fire, hoping to scare off whatever was stalking me. I left 10 rounds in the mag and grabbed my rifle bag and quickly walked back up to the house. I never did tell my wife about this, as I didn't want to freak her out. So, fast forward to about a year later from when we moved in, and my niece is staying with us and is a living-in nanny to earn money on a summer break from college. We're on our way back from the store, and about a mile from our house I saw 2 wires reflecting in the headlights, coming from a wide tree on the side of the road. Just ahead, it had caught my attention because they were higher than a deer, but a different color and size, and just as I had said, "What is that?" It vanished. I had made a comment that it was almost as if it had known that I could see its eyes and sort of moved. The color was kind of a golden green, but they resembled the mannerism of a large cat, as they felt sort of ominous. I guess it's hard to explain, but I shrugged it off as we were passing the tree and saw nothing. A few moments later, we arrived at the house. As we were getting bags out of the car, my 3-year-old son came bolting out of the house excited to see me as I was waiting to help carry in some of the bags. All of a sudden, I heard my dog growl. I looked in the direction that she was looking at. It was my neighbor's property across the street. What I saw has kept me up all night. Up until this point, I'd always been skeptical, as I'd never seen anything with my own 2 eyes, even with what had happened to me the year prior. I still had my doubts that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Now my street is kind of a spread out neighborhood. Each house sort of sits on several acres, and at the end of our road is a large lake. My neighbor's house sits adjacent to my house on about an acre lot. Directly in front of my house is a wall of woods, and directly behind my house there's several thousand acres of untouched forests. As I was looking across the street to my neighbor's property, I saw a large dark figure between the trees. At first, the movement caught me off guard, as it sort of looked like something big moving quickly on all fours. Then when it came out into clear view, it stood up and it walked just like a man. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. It was very tall, but what was strange about it was the distance it was covering, and the fact that when it was in front of the shed, I swear that I could see through it. It was clearly walking quickly, but moving faster than any person could at a sprint, and more importantly, that was absolutely no sound. It was like it was sort of fading in and out of reality as it moved. I said, "What the heck is that?" and realized that it was looking directly at us. It moved in an angle away from us, so to minimize its time out in the open and moving quickly as it could while still being silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, as I realized that whatever it was stalking us. I told my niece to get into the house now. I grabbed my son and we booked it inside. I grabbed my AR-15 with a short scope and came back outside to see my niece still grabbing stuff out of the car, knowing that I told her firmly and clearly to get into the house. Her disregard to my command really annoyed me at the time. Still, I watched over her without saying a word. As she was slowly walking, she turned towards the woods across the street from my house and suddenly bolted for the house. She ran up the steps in a sort of panic state. I asked her what she saw, and her face was pale as a ghost. She said, "I heard something big in the woods, walking loudly on the leaves, and when I turned toward it, I heard a deep sort of guttural growl." I asked her why she didn't come in when I told her, and she said that she thought that I was talking to my son. I told her what I had seen, and she wanted to get a closer look to see if she could see something too. I told her that was not a good idea, and she went anyway. As she was walking down the walkway, I heard the sound of dry leaves crunching in the woods across the street. I told her to stop and come take the flashlight. Now, at this point, she's about 6 feet away from my wife's SUV. As she turned and started walking back to me, I caught a glimpse of something gray and hairy bolt from behind the SUV back across the street into the woods. My porch is a raised porch, like I said, and our SUV is about 6.5 feet tall. Whatever it was, it cleared about 45 feet in what looked like a single leap. It moved like lightning, like nothing I'd ever seen. Whatever it was, it wanted my niece. It jumped behind the car out of my line of sight and was waiting for her. She still doubted my warnings and grabbed the flashlight and walked back toward the car, and as she entered my driveway, she stopped dead in her tracks and leaned forward as if she could see something. I asked her what she saw, and she turned and ran back up on the porch with a terrified look on her face saying, "No, no," just over and over again. She said that it was a figure hiding that she saw, and its eyes. I asked what they looked like, and all she could say was that they looked dull, red at first, but as you got closer, they looked sort of dead. I said, "What do you mean?" And she replied that they were pupils that looked gray, like the way eyes look when they go blind sort of thing. She said that it was really dark gray, and she says that she could see through it, almost like a dark cloud. She said that she wanted to go out again, and she took a step down the stairs, and as she did, it revealed itself from the trees. I said get inside, and I went in and locked the door, and this time I got a pretty good look at it, and it looked like what I said, but tall and sort of human-shaped too. It was really tall in fact, and man, it was ominous. It took off after this, and after that we didn't see anything again. Obviously, we didn't sleep that night. We just sat around talking about it for hours, but the next morning we did a height comparison to the tree limb that she saw it stand over. We put its height to around 9 feet tall, and its eyes were about 6 inches apart. At this point, I don't know what this thing was, but after doing some research, I think that maybe this thing is called a glimmerman or a crawler or something. I looked to see if there had been any other sightings in the Benton County, but there's nothing. More importantly though, I swear that it would fade in and out, almost like a shadow person, but bigger and more obvious. One of the things, though, that really stuck out to me is that this thing seems to be able to communicate telepathically, and this explains why everyone was hearing something that nobody else could hear. It also seems to have sort of like a playback-like communication. So, when I heard a dog panting, it was probably one of my dogs that it had heard. Well, I would guess at least, and the baby crying would have been our newborn baby who she had given birth to just recently, and maybe it had heard me call my wife's name and kept telepathically calling my wife's name with my voice or something. Another thing that my niece had said that night was that she felt really compelled to go back outside to it. She said that she felt like this thing was communicating with her somehow, and it wanted her to go back outside. But the more I read about this, the more everything that's been happening over this past year makes a lot of sense too. One thing that I find extra convincing is that down the road towards the lake, there's a property that is barbed wired off and is a sort of wall of forest with no driveway. A lot of the property down our road is undeveloped owned land, and one of the trees there, it has a large old sign that says, "Screamer lives here," with an arrow pointing back into the woods. Now, I have to admit that when I first saw this sign, I laughed at it, thinking maybe the owner screamed at trespassers who entered his property or something, and teenagers put up the sign to mess with him. But when I did a satellite search of our neighborhood, that entire section of road has no houses or trails or anything, and it's just pure forest for as far as the eye can see. One of the things that this thing is said to do is make a loud scream when threatened. Now that you understand my story, I doubt that this is the ending too, but the next question is, what can we do? I don't want my wife or kids to disappear one day, and if there is more than one of these things out there, this really makes the missing 411 make a whole lot of sense. I feel really perplexed and scared as to what I can do. If you guys have any advice, then I would love to hear it. I'll try and share any more information if anything else happens, but that's pretty much everything for now. This happened over a span of many months, and like I said, we've been living here for some time and things have gotten worse, but I just really don't know what to do. Again, if you guys and gals enjoy this type of content, please really consider subscribing and giving this a thumbs up. Thank you always for tuning into my channel, and I hope you all enjoyed.